Long Summary of Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, audio by Paper to Audio. My colleague Amos Tversky and I began our journey into understanding human judgment during a 1969 seminar at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. We were intrigued by the question of whether people were intuitive statisticians, much as they were intuitive grammarians. We quickly concluded that even expert researchers often relied on flawed intuitions, especially when dealing with small samples. This realization launched a 14-year collaboration that would form the basis of our work on heuristics and biases. Our research method was conversational, revolving around posing small experiments as questions to ourselves and each other. We sought to identify the first answer that came to mind, acknowledging that it was often biased even when we knew better. This practice allowed us to analyze the intuitive, often mistaken, answers that most people would likely share. We developed a routine of working days together, fueled by mutual amusement and a shared commitment to perfection that was easy to maintain because we were never bored. We ultimately documented about 20 biases of intuitive thinking in tasks involving probability, forecasting, and frequency estimation. This work challenged the prevailing view in the 1970s that humans were rational and that departures from rationality were explained solely by emotions. We showed that systematic errors were products of the machinery of cognition, and our paper Judgment Under Uncertainty remains one of the most highly cited works in social science. The public dissemination of our questions as demonstrations allowed scholars in diverse fields to recognize their own cognitive biases. In the psychodrama of the mind, I characterize our mental life through the metaphor of two agents, System 1 and System 2. System 1 operates automatically and quickly, requiring little or no effort and functioning outside of our voluntary control. It is the hero of my account, constantly generating impressions, feelings, and intentions that the slower System 2, our conscious reasoning self, normally endorses. Most of our mental work occurs in the silence of System 1, which produces intuitive responses without our knowledge of how they were generated. System 2 is responsible for effortful mental activities, complex computations, and the concentration needed to focus attention. Its operations are usually associated with agency, choice, and deliberate action. While System 2 believes it is the protagonist of our conscious lives, it is actually quite lazy and tends to accept the suggestions of System 1 without much scrutiny. System 2 is only mobilized when a question arises that System 1 cannot solve, or when we are required to override automatic impulses, such as during the Add 1 task. Our ability to control attention is a shared, limited budget. If we try to perform a demanding cognitive task while managing a situation that requires focus, we will fail. Intense concentration can even make us blind to obvious, unexpected stimuli, as demonstrated by the famous invisible gorilla experiment. The division of labor between the systems is efficient, minimizing effort while optimizing performance, as System 1 is generally accurate in its models of familiar situations. When System 1 fails, however, System 2 must be called upon to provide a deliberate, effortful solution. Conflicts arise between our intentional goals and the automatic responses of System 1, such as when we try to name the color of the ink in which words are printed, when the words themselves are other color names. These tasks require System 2 to override the automatic impulses of System 1. This is a common experience, like forcing ourselves not to stare at an oddly dressed person or trying to ignore a boring book. System 2 is the supervisor in charge of such self-control, though it is prone to laziness. Visual illusions serve as a prime example of System 1's autonomy. In the Mueller-Lyer illusion, we see two lines of identical length as different because of the appended fins. Even after we measure the lines and System 2 accepts the fact that they are equal, our System 1 still perceives them as unequal. We cannot decide to see the lines as equal. This is the definition of a cognitive illusion, an error that persists despite our knowledge of the truth. Cognitive illusions can rarely be overcome by simple willpower because System 1 cannot be turned off. Preventing these biases requires the vigilance and effortful activity of System 2, which is impractical to maintain at all times. The most we can hope for is to learn to recognize the situations where errors are likely, particularly when the stakes are high. It is significantly easier to identify these mistakes in others than it is to recognize our own, which makes gossip about colleagues a useful tool for self-improvement. Mental work involves physiological changes that reveal how hard System 2 is laboring. In our studies with Jackson Beatty on cognitive pupillometry, we discovered that pupil size is a faithful indicator of mental effort. When subjects engaged in the Add-1 or Add-3 tasks, their pupils dilated by up to 50% of their original area, and heart rates increased significantly. Effort increases with every digit in these tasks, peaking as the subject rushes to report the result and relaxing only when the task ends. This physiological response is distinct from emotional arousal and reflects the energy consumed by the brain during effortful reasoning. A general law of least effort governs both cognitive and physical exertion. If there are multiple ways to reach a goal, people will gravitate toward the path of least resistance. We avoid mental overload by breaking complex tasks into smaller steps or using long-term memory to store intermediate results, just as a computer does. Humans function best when engaged in a comfortable stroll of mental effort rather than a frantic sprint. When we are engaged in an effortful task, we can become effectively blind to stimuli that normally attract attention. In the gorilla experiment, counting basketball passes made people blind to a gorilla on the court. Our subjects in the Add-1 task likewise failed to notice the target letter K when they were working at maximum capacity. This selective allocation of attention is an evolutionary gift, allowing System 2 to protect essential operations while managing limited resources. We have a finite budget of attention, and we cannot exceed it without failing one of our tasks. Flow is a state of effortless concentration so deep that people lose their sense of time and self. It is an optimal experience for the person who achieves it, whether in painting or motorcycle riding. This state represents the separation of concentration from the effortful control of attention. While the activities are demanding, the concentration itself requires no exertion of willpower, thus freeing limited mental energy to focus entirely on the task at hand. It is possible to work very hard for long periods without depletion in such states. In contrast, ego depletion is a form of mental exhaustion that arises from the exertion of voluntary control. Studies by Roy Baumeister and his colleagues have shown that all forms of voluntary effort, whether cognitive, emotional, or physical, draw on a shared pool of mental energy. If you force yourself to suppress an emotional reaction to a film, you will be less able to persist in a hand-grip task. The exertion of self-control is depleting and makes people less willing to engage in subsequent difficult tasks. Depleted individuals are more likely to make impulsive choices, use superficial social judgments, and succumb to temptation. Glucose is a key fuel for the nervous system, and effortful mental activity appears to deplete blood glucose levels. Some experiments have shown that ingesting glucose can counteract the effects of ego depletion, restoring performance. The case of Israeli parole judges, who granted fewer paroles when they were hungry just before food breaks, suggests that fatigue and hunger significantly bias professional decision-making in high-stakes environments. The bat and ball puzzle illustrates how System 2 monitors the intuitive answers suggested by System 1. If a bat and ball cost $1.10 and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, the intuitive answer that the ball costs 10 cents is wrong, as the total would then be $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. More than 50% of students at Harvard and MIT gave the intuitive incorrect answer. These individuals failed to check their work, displaying a laziness of System 2 that is both troubling and persistent. Intellectual laziness is common, as many people are prone to place too much faith in their intuitions and avoid cognitive effort even when the task is not overly difficult. This pattern appears in the Flowers syllogism, where students endorse flawed arguments simply because the conclusion seems true. The conclusion comes first, and the arguments follow. Similarly, many respondents fail to remember that Detroit is in Michigan when asked about the murder rate in that state, simply because the city did not immediately come to mind. Shane Frederick's cognitive reflection test shows a correlation between cognitive ability and patience. People who score low on this test are impulsive, impatient, and eager for immediate gratification. They are more likely to accept the first idea that comes to mind, whereas high scorers are more engaged and skeptical of their own intuitions. Keith Stanovich distinguishes between intelligence and rationality, arguing that superficial thinking is a failure of the reflective mind. Rationality, or the ability to be engaged and self-critical, is a distinct attribute that may be just as important as traditional intelligence. The associative machine of System 1 functions through a spreading cascade of activity. When we hear the words bananas and vomit, our minds automatically form a causal story, causing an attenuated physical reaction like disgust, and priming our readiness to respond to related concepts like nausea or fruit. This process is associatively coherent, integrating cognitive, emotional, and physical responses in a self-reinforcing pattern. We make sense of the world by linking unexpected elements into a story and evaluating them as normal or surprising. This associative memory is a network of nodes where ideas are linked by resemblance, contiguity, and causality. Unlike the sequential conscious thoughts of early philosophy, current associative memory activates many nodes simultaneously. Most of this work is hidden, and our subjective experience is a narrow slice of what our minds are actually doing. The theory of associative activation is supported by the study of priming effects, where exposure to a concept influences the ease with which related words or actions are retrieved. The idiomotor effect is a particularly striking manifestation of priming. Students primed with words associated with the elderly walked more slowly down a corridor than those who were not. This happens without any conscious awareness, as the idea of old age primes the behavior associated with it. Reciprocal priming also exists. Being amused makes you smile, and forcing a smile makes you find cartoons funnier. This is why acting calm can actually help you feel calmer, as our thoughts, emotions, and actions are deeply intertwined in the associative network. Cognitive ease is a gauge on the mental cockpit indicating that things are going well, and it is affected by clear fonts, priming, repetition, and a good mood. When we experience cognitive ease, we are likely to be casual and superficial in our thinking, trusting our intuitions. Cognitive strain, on the other hand, mobilizes System 2, making us more vigilant, suspicious, and analytical. We are less intuitive but also less prone to errors when we operate under the strain of a poor font or a bad mood. This leads to an illusion of truth, where repeated statements become easier to process and are thus more likely to be believed. Familiarity is hard to distinguish from truth. Advertisers and politicians exploit this by repeating messages frequently. Even the mere repetition of a phrase in a nonsensical statement can increase the likelihood that people will judge the entire statement to be true. To persuade, you should maximize legibility, use simple language, and ensure your message is memorable, perhaps through rhyme. However, these strategies fail if the message is blatantly false. We have no conscious access to the source of our feeling of cognitive ease, so we confuse it with truth or familiarity. While we can overcome these superficial factors when strongly motivated, System 2 is often too lazy to do so. In the context of the cognitive reflection test, cognitive strain actually helped participants avoid the intuitive traps of the bat and ball puzzle, as the extra effort required to process the faint text forced System 2 to engage. The function of System 1 is to maintain an updated model of our world, representing what is normal. Surprise is the key indicator of how well we understand this model. We have active expectations, but most of our expectations are passive, meaning we are not surprised when a normal event happens. Recurrent experiences, such as meeting a specific acquaintance in foreign cities, can quickly shift from being surprising to being considered normal, revealing that System 1 is constantly updating its categories. The Moses illusion illustrates how we accept the normality of a context, biblical stories, and fail to notice if an irrelevant name is inserted. We are biologically prepared to identify agents, assign intentions, and perceive causality. We see intentions in moving triangles and circles, just as we see physical causality in a colliding billiard ball. This tendency is so strong that we attribute events to human-like agency even when they are random, such as the bombing patterns over London in World War II, which looked clustered to the eye but were statistically random. Our predilection for causal thinking leads us to misinterpret randomness as systematic. We seek explanations for events that have no cause, such as high cancer rates in sparsely populated counties, which are mere statistical artifacts. We are prone to confuse statistical properties of the category with properties of the individual. This causal hunger is essential to our ability to build stories, but it frequently causes us to fail when we are presented with problems requiring statistical reasoning, as we struggle to distinguish chance from intent. System 1 jumps to conclusions because it is designed to be efficient, but this efficiency can be risky in unfamiliar circumstances. We tend to resolve ambiguity by immediately choosing the most likely interpretation without ever being aware that ambiguity existed. If you read the word bank, your mind resolves it based on your most recent context, and this happens instantaneously and silently. We do not keep track of rejected alternatives, as doubt is an effortful domain belonging to System 2. We are also biased to believe and confirm. The initial attempt to believe a statement is an automatic operation of System 1. Unbelieving is the job of System 2, but if System 2 is distracted or lazy, we end up believing almost anything. This confirmatory bias, known as the positive test strategy, makes us prone to seek data that support our existing beliefs rather than attempting to refute them. We are also prone to the halo effect, where our liking for a person colors our judgments of their other traits, such as their generosity. Wizziati, what you see is all there is a central rule of System 1. We construct the most coherent story possible from the limited information we have, ignoring what we do not know. This facilitates rapid thinking, but leads to biases like overconfidence and the neglect of base rates. We make judgments based on the stories we construct rather than on the quantity or quality of the evidence, because we cannot account for information that is missing from our current associative network. We often make judgments without specific intent, as System 1 continuously monitors the environment and generates assessments. These basic assessments, such as evaluating someone's dominance or trustworthiness from their face, are automatic and play a role in intuitive judgment. We can judge competence in a second, and while our judgments may be wrong, they often determine election outcomes. These assessments are also used when we answer difficult questions by substituting them with easier ones. System 1 is capable of translating values across dimensions, such as matching the intensity of a personality trait to a height or a grade point average. The mental shotgun also ensures that we compute much more than we need. We evaluate things, compute averages, and detect patterns without wanting to. When we ask, is the average length of these lines the same? System 1 answers instantly. However, when we ask for the total length, System 2 must be engaged, as the system does not compute sums automatically. This limitation is a fundamental feature of the associative machinery. We process information as prototypes and averages, but we perform poorly at summing values. In experiments regarding endangered species, participants were willing to pay the same amount to save 2,000 birds as they were to save 200,000, simply because they reacted to the prototypical image of a drowning bird. Intensity matching explains why we have intuitions about matters we know little about. We simply match the intensity of our emotional response to a different, more accessible scale. The Linda problem famously demonstrates the conjunction fallacy, where people judge a more specific scenario to be more probable than a more general one. Linda is described as an outspoken, bright philosophy student who was concerned with social justice. When asked to rank her career, people judge feminist bank teller as more probable than bank teller because the description is a better fit. System 1 uses representativeness, the degree to which an object resembles a stereotype, as a shortcut to probability. This shortcut leads to serious errors because representativeness is not influenced by base rates. If someone is described as a shy and tidy soul, we naturally think of a librarian. Even if we know that there are far more farmers than librarians, we ignore this statistical fact and rely on the stereotype. We often choose to believe that the description fits the stereotype, neglecting the reality of the population proportions. This bias is pervasive even among those with statistical training. To discipline intuition, one must anchor the judgment of probability on the base rate and then evaluate the diagnosticity of the evidence. However, this is difficult and unnatural. Most people prefer to rely on their intuitive impressions. Even experts like our colleague Robin Dawes can be fooled by these descriptions. The representativeness heuristic allows us to make quick judgments, but it prevents us from accurately assessing the likelihood of events, causing us to neglect the objective reality of base rates. Our treatment of base rates depends on whether we see them as statistical or causal. When we are told about a cab company with 85% green cabs and 15% blue cabs, we ignore this base rate when assessing witness testimony. But when we are told that green cabs are involved in 85% of accidents, we form a causal stereotype of recklessness. We now incorporate this statistical fact into our causal story, and our judgments improve accordingly. Stereotypes, while socially sensitive, are how our system 1 organizes categories. The Nisbet-Bourdieu experiment showed that students who learned about the bystander intervention study still failed to apply this knowledge to predict the behavior of individuals they had seen in video interviews. They had learned a general fact, but could not apply it to specific cases. They continued to believe that the people they saw in the video were helpful, despite knowing that most people in similar situations are not. Students only learned when they were surprised by specific individuals failing to act. This conclusion has profound implications for teaching psychology. We learn by finding surprises in our own behavior, not by hearing general facts about how people behave. The dissonance of a specific case that defies our prior beliefs forces us to resolve the conflict by creating a new causal story. This is the only effective way to integrate new understanding into our thinking about the world and ourselves. Regression to the mean is a statistical reality that our minds often interpret as a causal phenomenon. An Israeli flight instructor noted that praise was followed by worse performance, while punishment was followed by improvement. He attributed this to the effectiveness of punishment, but it was just regression to the mean. Extreme performance is rarely repeated. The cadet who does exceptionally well is likely to do worse next time, regardless of what the instructor does, because his initial success was due in part to luck. Predictions are typically non-regressive, meaning we believe that an individual's future performance will be as extreme as their recent past performance. If an athlete does great on day 1, we predict they will do just as well on day 2. This is an illusion. We should predict a more moderate performance, closer to the mean, because luck is fickle. We overestimate the consistency of human performance because we confuse the stability of a skill with the variability of outcomes that include luck. We can correct intuitive predictions using a systematic approach. Start with the average, evaluate the evidence, estimate the correlation, and then regress the prediction toward the mean. If the evidence is weak, we should stay close to the average. This feels unnatural because we are biased toward extreme stories, but an unbiased prediction will be correct on average. It will not give us the thrill of calling a spectacular winner, but it will prevent us from being blindsided by the inevitability of regression. The illusion of validity is the persistent confidence we feel in our predictions despite evidence that they are unreliable. My experience evaluating officers for the Israeli army proved this perfectly. Despite knowing that our assessments had almost no predictive power, we remained completely confident in each individual case. Our associative system generated a coherent story about each candidate, and our system too endorsed it without question. We were trapped by our own feeling of certainty. This illusion extends to the stock market, where financial experts and individual traders believe they can outperform the market. Research shows that trading is hazardous to wealth, and that most stock pickers perform worse than a dart-throwing chimp. Professional fund managers also fail to show persistent achievement. Their rankings from year to year correlate at near zero. Yet, the illusion of skill persists because the culture of the financial industry rewards overconfidence and confuses luck with ability. Experts are especially prone to overconfidence when they operate in low-validity environments. Political pundits, for example, have been shown to perform worse than random chance in their long-term forecasts. Yet the most confident pundits get the most airtime. We must recognize that many outcomes are simply unpredictable, determined by chaotic forces and sheer luck. Admitting our ignorance is the first step toward better judgment, but social pressures make such honesty extremely rare in professional circles. Framing effects occur when the formulation of a problem determines our beliefs and preferences, even when the underlying reality is the same. Italy won and France lost are logically identical, but they evoke different associations. Our choices are not bound by reality, because System 1 is not bound by reality. We are affected by whether a survival rate is stated as 90% or 10% mortality. We are more likely to prefer a sure gain than a gamble, but we prefer a gamble over a sure loss. Loss aversion is the central pillar of prospect theory. Losses loom larger than gains. This asymmetry is embedded in our biology. We have a threat detection system that prioritizes bad news over good news. Our sensitivity to loss is not just about money, it is about how we value all potential outcomes. We are loss-averse regarding our health, our status, and our pride. This leads to the endowment effect, where we place higher value on what we already own simply because we own it. Experiments show that we can overcome the endowment effect when we learn to think like a trader, treating goods as items for exchange rather than items for use. Loss aversion makes it difficult to negotiate, as each side treats concessions as painful losses rather than useful agreements. We remain attached to the status quo and are slow to adapt to new realities, often preferring the safety of the default option over the potential benefits of changing our path. The distinction between our experiencing self, which lives in the moment, and our remembering self, which keeps score, is crucial for understanding well-being. Experiments with colonoscopies showed that people judge their total pain based on the peak intensity and the end level, ignoring the duration of the procedure. This peak-end rule means we can prefer a longer procedure if the end is relatively mild, even if we experience more total pain. The remembering self is a construction of our memory that simplifies our lives into stories. The remembering self rules our choices. We repeat experiences that left a better memory, even if the actual experience of living them was worse. This is a tyranny because our experiencing self is effectively silenced by the preferences of the remembering self. We value memories over actual time, even though our time is our most finite resource. We have a goal of wanting our life to be a good story, but this often leads to choices that harm our experiencing self's well-being. Life satisfaction measures ask the remembering self for a summary judgment of our lives. These measures are prone to the focusing illusion, where we overestimate the impact of specific factors like income or climate because we are thinking about them when asked. We must strive for a hybrid view of well-being that considers both our remembered satisfaction and the quality of our daily experience. Rationality requires that we do not ignore the experiences of our living selves, even if we are naturally inclined to prioritize the narrative of our remembering selves. You have reached the end of the long summary.